Well, welcome back to the next big story as we get pivotal updates on Eloro Resources developing its potential giant Iska silver tin polymetallic property in the Potosi Department of Southern Bolivia. Trades on the TSX under ELO and the OTCQX under ELRRF. This interview is disseminated on behalf of Eloro Resources, and we're privileged to be joined by Thomas Larson, Chairman and CEO. First and foremost, welcome, sir.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, such a pleasure to get you on in this fascinating time for the commodities and precious metal markets. And for newer viewers, maybe just stumbling into Laurel Resources, maybe break down the overview, in this current silver market, why people should be paying attention.
Well, uh, based on the silver market itself, uh, there's so many generalists out there, including myself, but very, very impressed with what's taken place in the physical market and the demand from the physical market over the past few months. And it's probably been an underlying situation for the last couple of years, due to the structural deficit of silver annually. They're undermining by close to 200 million ounces a year. So the stats are stating, the Silver Institute. So there is, as we all know, a real disconnect between the paper market and the at COMEX in London, and then what you're seeing over in in Shanghai, premiums of 10, 15, 20%. I don't know, you saw silver take off, up to that 120 at 130, 120 an ounce mark, US dollars, 2 or 3 weeks ago. And it certainly retraced, 50, that 50% rule back down. I just want to see some actual short-term support levels, and get that volatility out of the commodity from the trading perspective, so that we can really focus on the medium to longer term aspects of what, for instance, Eloro Resources is up to.
Yeah, and I want to dive a lot deeper into Alora's aspects of your business. I mean, Iska project there has, attracted significant attention. I mean, how do you define the long-term vision for this project? And again, for newer audiences, do you want to just explain what you guys are doing here?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a long story, obviously, because this is one of the largest Bolivian discoveries in a couple of 100 years. So I'm being told by, well, one in particular, Dr. Osvaldo Arce, who actually is our executive VP for exploration and development, based out of southern Bolivia. He's born and raised in Bolivia. He's written volumes, 2 volumes on metallogenic, massive Bolivian style multi-metal deposits, usually found on what we call the tin belt, that runs 1,000 kilometers from the Bolivian-Argentinian border in the south up into northwestern Bolivia into southeastern Peru. That's what we deem. It's about over 1,000 kilometers long. That's what we deem the tin belt. And what that is basically a major deeper feeder system called a porphyry, a tin porphyry. And it's part of this volcanic system that was built out, 12, 15 million years ago. That's the type of environment that we're involved in. So we're dealing with massive scale, potentially. But I'd really like to emphasize that, Bolivia was a difficult place from the perception of foreign investors when, the MAS party, the socialist left party, run by a fellow called Evo Morales, took power in 2006. And that really, there were some real issues like World Arbitration Court recognition was, suddenly no longer, part of the Bolivian way of doing things. It was up to the Supreme Court, which was basically run by the MAS party. So there was a lot of, incentives for risk capitals up front, starting up, large mines. That was basically moved away from what we did see, back in the 1980s, 90s, that had, major companies in Bolivia. Bolivia's always had a major endowment of mining. GDP is usually 45% coming from the mining sector in Bolivia. So it's a very, very important part of the fabric of Bolivia. this didn't this even with this type of political uncertainty, we were so impressed with Dr. Osvaldo Arce, who was actually president of the Bolivian Geological Society and a good friend of my former executive VP, who's just retired, sent out a press release just recently. He'll stay on as an advisor, senior advisor. Dr. Bill Pearson, world recognized geologist who knew Dr. Osvaldo Arce from many South American ventures that Bill had been overseeing, and that came across Osvaldo on a couple of occasions and worked with him on a couple of projects. So Osvaldo is world renowned. For instance, the PDAC, this big conference in Toronto, the Bolivian Chamber of Commerce and other, the mines minister, who's a good friend of Osvaldo's, they're all coming up to PDAC. Dr. Osvaldo Arce, our executive VP, is the sort of the main speaker on behalf of the Bolivian government when it comes to Bolivian geology. So that gives you the depth and the recognition of his importance, not only for us, but for when moving forward in a country like Bolivia. The big thing is that the government, the MAS party, have basically been totally taken out of the system. They had less than 3% of the popular vote when the election took place last summer. A new right-wing government, centered a right wing, has replaced the MAS party, the former Evo Morales party, left-wing party. His name is Rodrigo Paz Pereira, has really strengthened ties with the United States, especially, and this is sort of for our long-term view. We're really pleased with that because at the end of the day, we are dealing with critical metals, like 4 different types of metals in this system. Tin, silver is the dominant metal, probably 50% of the value. Zinc, lead, but tin also being a critical metal. And these are metals that the United States and other, Northern Hemisphere, Western societies will need over the next 20, 30, 40 years. Why send all the concentrates over to the Far East, when the US, for instance, can really build and really get things going. They've done I personally believe they've done a great job with what they had to do in Venezuela to get the people happy again, to get things moving in the right direction. What's going on in Argentina? There's a real sort of basic understanding of fiscal responsibility taking place in South America, getting away from socialism. So with the DFC, for instance, they've been down. This is a department of the United States government. They've been down a couple of times visiting La Paz, the new ministry, the new government. In fact, one of our directors, Pablo Ardone, a director of Eloro, but is one of the top mining lawyers in Bolivia, works with a company called PPO. He introduced us to the DFC because he was very much involved with the talks with this new government coming in, we've had 4 meetings already. It's really, really interesting, really, to see how Bolivia really wants to work with the US. And so that's just, you can imagine what that does from the standpoint of potential foreign investment coming into the country. Obviously, there are steps that still have to be made over the next coming, 6 to 12 months, for investment initiatives for foreign investment, certain potential off-taking arrangements over time, but at least it's going in the right direction. It's totally different from where Bolivia was, last spring.
Can you speak a little bit more particularly to the next maybe 12, 24 months? I mean, what are the key milestones investors should be watching for? I mean, when it comes to resource estimates, economic studies, or permitting progress?
Well, we've, one of and it was so crucial when we first became involved on this project, the Iska had never been drilled ever. A large 9.5 square kilometer volcanic edifice with a collapsed resurgence center called a caldera. Very similar to the Cerro Rico deposit, 180 kilometers due north, the largest silver deposit ever discovered by man. over 2.5 billion ounces of silver with 0.2% tin. The silver was more or less the driving force of I mean, it was discovered back in the 16th century. A lot of glaciation that took place down at the southern part of Bolivia where we're located. Therefore, a lot of surface minerals, metals were leached out, oxidized. So, it was basically not looked at. No modern technology, no modern drilling of sorts on this Isca project in southern Bolivia. But this is where Dr. Osvaldo Arce, he was asked by the private ownership. It's a private owned project that we now own 99% of, control all the economics of. It was 10 million US when we first became involved in this project back in 2020 when we decided to make the leap. We brought in a really good partner in the name of Crestcat Capital out of a US fund out of Colorado, Denver, Colorado. They're our largest shareholder. Out of 110 million shares, they have around 17%, 16% of that. Brought in a fellow called Dr. Quinton Hennig, who's very well known. He actually is now president of San Cristobal, a very large former Sumitomo operation, 180 kilometers due west of us, run by Americans out of Denver, Colorado. So there's a lot of synergy. We signed an NDA with them. So just giving you a little bit of background, just so that you understand that, this isn't some little discovery that, and now we're going to do a little PEA and now we're going to there's a lot of moving parts on when you come in with something this large. We came out initially after raising close to $50 million from 2020 to 2024 and drilling over 100,000 meters. Remember, never before drilled project property, and every single hole was mineralized. Not all commercial, but definitely mineralized. So it just shows you the strength of the water gas combinations deeper down that created all of this upsurging metal, through igneous type of structures like breccia pipes and dacitic domes, things like that. So a massive potential. With all this drilling, we finally came out with an MRE, an initial MRE, a mineral resource estimate, 43101 inferred report in 2023, September, October. We outlined over close to 300 million ounces of silver in situ. A considerable amount of zinc, lead. It's a polymetallic multi-metal, and also a tin section as well. And the idea was 600 million tons were basically outlined in this massive envelope within the center of this volcano. And the grade silver grade was only like, 12, 13, 14 gram on 100-meter spacings, outlining this massive sort of potential, playing field, if you want to call it, or this envelope of mineralization that we still to this day don't know the full extent of. So we knew that there was lots of high-grade areas of silver, of tin potentially, but mainly silver. Zinc and lead are usually pretty uniform in value. They stay constant, around 1.5% zinc per ton, 0.8% lead. So again, those are secondary metals to this program. It's mainly silver, tin. So what we did was we infilled for the next year and a half, 50-meter spacings, outlined higher grade areas of silver for what we're going to come out with being an economic model over a 12 to 15-year mine life based on 150, 160 million tons. This is on the upper part of this system, showing a certain grade comparable to San Cristobal. They have silver, zinc, lead, which their concentrates are silver, lead, silver, zinc, similar to what we will have. They're not on the tin belt. They don't have tin. So what we're building out after all this metallurgical work that we've done over the last 2 years, showing that there's no deleterious elements, penalty elements, that it's clean material, easy to separate, easy for processing. All that work will be in the PEA. I expect to have that out in the, after the second quarter So April, May, June, July, you'll see the first actual economic assessment. Preliminary PEA, that's pre feasibility study, which could take, another 8, 9, 10 months, maybe a year tops. The great thing about Bolivia, especially they know us really well, the mines minister and Dr. Oswaldo Arce, who will be with him at PDAC. They want this to move quickly because it's going to help the economy in southern Bolivia. This will be as large, if not larger, eventually than that of San Cristobal, which probably contributes 30% of the mining tax receipts to the Bolivian government today. So we're dealing with massive 30, 40, 50,000 ton a day type operations. Now you're in Bolivia. So this is taking time. We're a small balance sheet. We're only 300 million Canadian market cap. For something like this, it's going to cost minimally $500 million US, the big preliminary model that we're working towards. So, there's a lot of work in process right now on that. We want to continue with a lot more drilling. You'll see some announcements very shortly on that point, because we expect to have 2 to 3 more drills back up and running the end of March, early April. That could be I won't get into the exact meterage until the press release comes out, but you're going to have a lot of information. You're going to have a lot of news flow while we're building out also, your PEA, your economic model.
So outside of these catalysts, I mean, there's obviously a lot to encapsulate here. So if you had to just kind of refine it down for maybe newer investors that are just stumbling into the story, why should they be paying attention to Elero today?
Well, Eloro, uh, first of all, you have to have some sort of affinity towards, commodity prices such as silver and tin. If you're not interested or you're indifferent to that, don't even get involved with this company. This is silver. If you believe in silver over time, which I do, and also in tin because of its scarcity, especially the US, they consume over 50,000 tons of tin a year. They have no tin source. They rely on the Far East. You know how things are changing there. So this is another sort of hook for them to become more interested in us. I look at the tin, I look at the silver endowment, I look at the economics. Bolivia is very, very cheap, small country, 12 million people. There's a huge change, right-wing change taking place in Bolivia as we speak. We've been there for 5 years when it was much more risky to be involved with. We're sitting in a very, very interesting situation, to say the least. And obviously, if you can outline, if you can show at some point a major valuation based on your PEA, based on the profit margin per ton of silver, refined down along with the zinc lead, and then tin as a separate sort of entity. Yeah, you'll understand when you're dealing with 110, 115 million shares and it's trading at $3, the valuations, there's a real opportunity. That's probably, that would be the opportunity. Where will that share price go in reflection of what's coming out of this system?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely appreciate you taking the time today. This has been quite the intriguing story, to say the least, as we pass it off to the viewers. We'd love to know what you think. If you want to explore Loro any further, we're going to leave the links in the description below, but consider subscribing as news and catalysts come down the wire. Of course, we'll bring it to you here. But on that, as always, we look forward to catching you in the next one.